Please support this channel by clicking on the links below. Afrocentricity by Molefi Asante. Washingtonianism. Booker T. Washington was one of the most astute black leaders who ever lived. Few men loved their people as so did Washington. His sacrifice for the educational, economic, and political advancement of his people took the greatest degree of sagacity and courage of his era. Washington's place in history has been clouded by European scholars. They wanted to demonstrate, on one hand, that a conflict of objectives existed between Washington and Du Bois, when in actuality it did not. The differences of opinion between Washington and Du Bois were never so great as the difference between Du Bois and Garvey. Yet in neither case did either of the thinkers demonstrate a goal any different than the liberation of African people. In fact, Booker T. Washington, like Du Bois and Garvey, understood the African connection and attempted to exploit it for African progress. Unquestionably, great men will differ, but the differences were not over ultimate objectives, but tactics. An objective is the profound end rooted in the historical imperative of a people to which all Afrocentric action is directed. Tactic refers to measures and methods employed to advance us toward our objectives. In analyzing Washington's place, the Afrocentrist must look at his intellectual growth pattern in order to demonstrate his true character. As a young man, he made an Afrocentric commitment to the black people of Alabama. Although there may have only been a few positions for a person of Washington's training, he took the position in Alabama because of his sense of duty, committing his life to the struggle for a decent education for blacks in the South. It was not only a committed act, it was courageous. Given the environment during this time in history, Ku Klux Klan groups had formed. Lynchings were taking place regularly, and Southern whites were approaching blacks' land. This arena greeted Washington when he stepped onto the world center. His effective management of that arena left us a memorable legacy. What have been called accommodationalist positions were often deliberate manipulations of his white audience, and his positions on the legal aspirations of blacks were clear and forceful. I would not have the Negro deprived of any privilege guaranteed to him by the Constitution of the United States. It is not best for the Negro that he relinquish any of his constitutional rights. Washington, 1899. Furthermore, he argues that legislation must not confer upon an ignorant and poor white man legal and political privileges denied to the black. Washington, 1899. Perhaps the Atlanta Exposition speech was the great hallmark of his genius, yet it infuriated Northern blacks who did not understand the nature of the racist South nor the legacy of slavery still prevalent in the minds and behaviors of Africans. Washington understood that legacy and attempted to squeeze the most benefit possible out of it. What he did not do to the satisfaction of Northern blacks was to attack the wolves in their home, preferring to dog them with his good sense and in feeling that the ultimate victory would come at a later date. Yet, he also failed to satisfy the white racist who wanted no part of the New South, even with one hand as separate as the fingers. Indeed, the one hand disturbed them. Although Washington achieved the greatest degree of publicity for this speech in 1895, and it became his signature on the age, it cannot be called his most representative work. As in the case of all political geniuses, he had a pattern of growth which could not be contained in a single speech. Indeed, the Atlanta Exposition speech was eloquent and oratorically sculptured from the best traditions of public speaking, but it was not representative of Washington's life work. His victories at the economical, political, and educational levels came about because of his commitment to excellence. A considerate view of historical realities in the 1890s and early part of the 20th century produced in him one dynamic, dedicated, and determined African. Washingtonianism was mainly economic independence. It was this particular aspect of Washington's program that appealed to Marcus Garvey. But economic independence could not produce freedom. Indeed, Washington's real mistake was not to see the indivisibility of freedom. Economic freedom must always be connected to political and cultural freedom, else freedom does not truly exist. The fragility of economic independence has been demonstrated throughout the United States, Kenya, Soviet Union, Zimbabwe, Zambia, Liberia, and South Africa. In addition, even the control of production and land can be tenuous if a people do not possess the political power to safeguard their economic freedom. In fact, land must never be equated with freedom. Freedom is a mental state. Furthermore, political power or state power without cultural and economic power is also meaningless for liberation. These African nations, which have gained political independence but have not secured their cultural or economic independence, remain enslaved to alien forces. Although Washington predicted African economic and political independence, he showed no real appreciation for cultural liberation. In his view, a confident economic posture overrode all other considerations. As a result, he is criticized by the Marxist as a capitalist and by the capitalist as a socialist. For Washington, economic independence was not an ideology, it was a practical philosophy. This program was meant to create an independent element within the black population. To this end, Tuskegee Institute was merely a base for Washington's philosophy of success. It woefully lacked Afrocentricity. The spirit of the age had not revealed itself in African history and culture at this time, and therefore Washington shared in the ignorance of his era. Only now, armed with the past, can we look to the future. Numerous ideologues since Washington have included nuances of its philosophical postures in their works, particularly on education and economics. The reason for this is the powerful truth inherent in the Kiswahili saying, Muko vile mijiwaveko wenyewe, si vile wenji waweyeko. You are what you make of yourself, not what others make of you. Washington viewed economics as developed through the power of the people themselves. This view was only short-sighted because it lacked an Afrocentric perspective which would have involved politics and culture as well as economics. Thus, its failure and the subsequent failure of other such Washingtonian ideas, such as black capitalism and McKissick's Soul City, attest not to any lack of enthusiasm, but rather a lack of ideological direction. Similarly, other economic programs suffer from the same misconception of the African experience in America. Unlike some others, Washington at least knew the character of the people with whom he is dealing. Nevertheless, no program, however brilliantly organized, can survive if its conception is not based on Afrocentricity. Therefore, Booker T. Washington was unable to generate the lasting spirit so essential as a revolutionary characteristic of people seeking Reconstruction. He could not give what he did not possess himself.